The sound of cracking stone was the only warning Delilah Thorne received before the world above her exploded into chaos, sending a cascade of rocks and dust tumbling down the narrow canyon trail, where she stood frozen in terror. She had been traveling alone from Santa Fe to Jerome, Arizona territory, against every piece of advice her late father's business partners had given her. But the copper mining town held the deed to a property she had inherited, and stubbornness ran deep in her blood. Now that stubbornness might cost her everything as boulders the size of wagons crashed down the mountainside, blocking any path forward or back. Her horse had bolted the moment the rumbling started, leaving her stranded on a small outcropping that was quickly crumbling beneath her feet. She pressed herself against the canyon wall, feeling the vibrations of destruction all around her, knowing that within moments the ledge would give way and she would fall into the rocky depths below. Through the thunderous roar and choking dust, she heard something else, a shout unmistakably human, cutting through the chaos with urgent command. Then came the pounding of hooves fast and reckless, and suddenly a rider emerged through the cloud of debris like something from a fever dream. He was lean and tall in the saddle, his dark hair covered with a wide-brimmed hat, his face obscured by a bandana pulled up against the dust. Without slowing, he guided his paint horse along a path that seemed impossible, barely wide enough for the animal's hooves, racing against the collapsing mountainside. "Jump!" he shouted, his voice rough and commanding as he drew close enough for her to see his eyes, startling blue against his dust-darkened face. "Now, or you will die." Delilah did not hesitate. She had faced enough in her 22 years to know when survival required absolute trust in a stranger. As another section of the ledge crumbled away, she launched herself toward the moving horse, toward those outstretched arms that caught her with surprising strength. He pulled her across his lap in one fluid motion, his arm locked around her waist as he wheeled the horse around and urged it into a gallop. Rocks crashed down behind them, beside them, the entire canyon seeming to come apart as they raced against death itself. She buried her face against his chest, feeling his heart pound against her cheek, the solid warmth of him the only real thing in a world gone mad. They burst out of the canyon as a final massive boulder sealed the passage behind them, the sound like thunder that rolled across the Arizona landscape. The horse, a magnificent paint with intelligent eyes, slowed to a canter and then a walk, its sides heaving with exertion. The cowboy's arm remained firm around Delilah's waist even as the immediate danger passed, and she became suddenly, acutely aware of how close they were, how she could feel every breath he took, how her hands clutched his shirt as though she might still fall. "You can breathe now," he said, his voice gentler than before, and she realized she had indeed been holding her breath. He pulled down the bandana, revealing a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and lips that might have been carved from stone for all their grimness. "That was closer than I care for." "You saved my life," Delilah managed, her own voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. "I do not even know how to thank you." "You can start by telling me what possessed you to travel that canyon alone," he said, though there was no real anger in his words, only a kind of weary concern. "That trail has been unstable for weeks. The mining operations have the whole mountain ready to come down." "I did not know," she admitted, finally pulling back enough to look at him properly. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with features that spoke of hard living and harder choices, but those blue eyes held something she had not expected. Genuine worry for a complete stranger. "I am traveling to Jerome. I inherited property there." "Jerome," he repeated, and something shifted in his expression. "That is where I am headed as well. I am Preston Irons. I work for the United Mining Company, checking claims and surveying new sites." "Delilah Thorne," she replied, aware that she was still sitting across his lap like a child, but the ground seemed very far away and her legs felt like water. "I apologize for my current position. I seem to have lost my horse." For the first time, something like humor touched his features, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "Your horse had more sense than you did, Miss Thorne. He probably made it to the way station 5 miles back." He shifted in the saddle, and she became aware of how improper this all was, how scandalous it would seem if anyone saw them. But they were alone on the desert trail, with the October sun burning overhead and miles of scrubland stretching in every direction. Propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. "Can you ride?" he asked, and when she nodded, he carefully helped her shift so she sat in front of him, positioned so she could hold the saddle horn while he controlled the reins. It was still impossibly intimate, his arms bracketing her on either side, his chest solid against her back, but at least it resembled a practical arrangement for traveling. "The way station is not far. We can see about your horse and get you cleaned up. Then I will escort you the rest of the way to Jerome. That canyon was the only direct route, and it will be days before anyone can clear it." "I cannot ask you to do that," Delilah protested, even as part of her desperately wanted him to insist. The thought of continuing alone, of facing the wild country without guide or protection, filled her with a dread she was too proud to voice. "You are not asking. I am offering." Preston's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Besides, I could not live with myself if I pulled you from one disaster, only to let you ride into another. The territory between here and Jerome is not kind to lone travelers, especially women." There was something in the way he said it, a darkness that suggested he had seen the evidence of such unkindness firsthand. Delilah decided not to press the matter. Instead, she let herself focus on the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them. The way Preston guided the animal with such casual expertise that it seemed like an extension of his own body. The landscape rolled past, all red rock and scattered juniper, with mountains rising in the distance like the broken teeth of some ancient giant. "What brings a woman alone to Jerome?" Preston asked after they had ridden in silence for a time. "That is not a gentle town. The mines bring in all kinds, and not many of them respectable." "My father owned a building there," Delilah explained, grateful to focus on something other than how aware she was of every point where their bodies touched. "He died 6 months ago, back in Missouri. I only recently discovered the extent of his holdings. Most of his partners assumed I would sell everything and stay east, but I wanted to see for myself what he built. Your father was a miner, a businessman. He invested in various ventures. The Jerome property was one of his last acquisitions." She paused, then added more quietly, "I think he would have wanted me to see it, to understand what drew him west in the first place." Preston was silent for a moment, and Delilah wondered what he was thinking, this stranger who had risked his life for hers without hesitation. Finally he said, "The West changes people. Some it breaks. Others it forges into something stronger. Your father must have seen something in you to leave you this legacy. Or he simply had no one else to leave it to," Delilah replied with more bitterness than she intended. "I was his only child. My mother died when I was young. He spent most of his life chasing opportunities across the country. That must have been lonely." The simple observation, delivered without pity or judgment, struck something deep in Delilah's chest. "Yes," she admitted, "it was." They reached the way station, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was a rough structure, built more for function than comfort. But the proprietor was a weathered woman named Martha who took one look at Delilah's disheveled state and immediately ushered her inside. Preston's prediction proved correct. Delilah's horse had indeed found its way to the station, drawn by the promise of water and feed. While Martha helped Delilah wash the dust from her face and hands, Preston saw to the animals and arranged for rooms for the night. "You are lucky Preston found you," Martha said as she poured hot water into a basin. "That man has saved more lives than most doctors I have known. Found my son when he got lost in a dust storm last year, carried him 10 miles back here on foot after his horse broke a leg." "He seems to make a habit of rescuing people," Delilah replied, scrubbing at the grime that had settled into every crease of her skin. "That is just his nature. Some men are born to it." Martha handed her a clean cloth. "Though I will say, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when he carried you in here, like you were made of glass and might shatter if he let go." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm water. He was simply being careful. "I had just survived a rockslide." Martha hummed, a knowing sound that suggested she saw more than Delilah wanted to reveal. "Well, you clean up here. I will have some supper ready shortly. You and Preston can discuss your travel plans over a proper meal." Dinner was a simple affair of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. But after the day's ordeal, it tasted better than anything from Delilah's memory. Preston had cleaned up as well, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar when freed from its coating of dust. And when he removed his hat to eat, she could see his face properly for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, all clean lines and honest features. But it was the intelligence in his eyes that caught her attention, the sense that he was always observing, always thinking several steps ahead. "I have been considering our route," he said, spreading a worn map on the table between them. "The main road to Jerome will add 2 days to the journey, but it is safer. There are regular patrols and way stations." "What about the northern route?" Delilah asked, studying the map. She had always been good with maps and figures, skills her father had encouraged even when society suggested such things were unladylike. Preston looked surprised that she could read the map so easily. "The northern route is faster but more isolated. If we encounter trouble, there would be no help nearby." "What kind of trouble?" He hesitated, then seemed to decide she deserved honesty. "Bandits, mostly. Men who prey on travelers, sometimes Apache, though they usually keep to the higher elevations this time of year. And the terrain itself is challenging. Flash floods, rock slides like the one you just survived, trails that disappear in the dark. But you know it well enough. I have ridden it a dozen times." Delilah looked at the map, at the 2 routes that would take them to the same destination by vastly different paths. The practical choice was obvious, the safe choice. But something in her, that same stubborn streak that had brought her west in the first place, rebelled against taking the long way around. "I trust your judgment," she said finally. "If you believe we can manage the northern route, I would prefer to reach Jerome as quickly as possible." Preston studied her for a long moment, and Delilah had the distinct impression he was reassessing his initial opinions. "You are braver than most men I know, Miss Thorne, or more foolish," she replied. "I have been told there is little difference." That earned her a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Then we are in good company because I have been told the same. We will leave at first light and take the northern route. But you must follow my lead without question. If I say ride, you ride. If I say hide, you hide." "Agreed, agreed." They set out the next morning as promised, with the dawn still painting the sky pink and purple. Preston set a steady pace, not pushing the horses but covering ground efficiently. He was a man comfortable in silence, Delilah discovered, not filling the empty spaces with unnecessary chatter. At first she appreciated it, using the quiet to process everything that had happened, the surreal nature of her rescue and this unexpected journey with a stranger. But as the hours passed and the landscape grew wilder, she found herself wanting to know more about the man who had appeared out of the dust like an answer to a prayer she had not known to speak. "Have you always worked in mining?" she asked as they paused to water the horses at a small spring. "Not always. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, learned to ride before I could walk properly." Preston loosened his horse's cinch to let the animal breathe easier. "But ranching is a hard life, and when my father died, there was not enough land to split between my brothers and me. I headed west, worked as a scout for a wagon train, then hired on with the mining company. The pay is decent, and I like the travel." "Do you miss Texas?" "Sometimes. I miss the people more than the place. My mother, my brothers, the certainty of what each day would bring." He looked out across the Arizona landscape, squinting against the glare. "But I am not sure I would go back, even if I could. I have become someone different out here." "Better or worse?" Delilah asked, genuinely curious. Preston considered the question seriously. "Different," he repeated. "Not better or worse, just shaped by different experiences. The West strips away pretense. You become exactly who you are, for good or ill." "And who are you, Preston Irons?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Delilah felt something shift between them, some invisible line crossed. "I am still figuring that out," he admitted. "But I know I am the kind of man who could not ride past a woman in danger. I am the kind of man who believes people deserve help without needing to earn it. Beyond that, I suppose time will tell." They rode on, and as the day progressed, Delilah found herself watching Preston with growing fascination. He moved through the landscape with absolute confidence, reading signs in the dirt and rocks that were invisible to her untrained eye. When they encountered a dried riverbed, he chose their crossing point with care, explaining how flash floods could appear without warning. When a hawk circled overhead, he noted which direction it flew, using it to gauge the location of water or prey. He was a man entirely at home in this wild country, and watching him made Delilah feel both protected and inspired to learn. They made camp that evening in a small canyon sheltered from the wind, with a fire built small and hot the way Preston said would minimize smoke and attention. He had shot a rabbit during the afternoon ride, and now he prepared it with practiced efficiency while Delilah gathered deadwood for the fire. Working together in companionable silence felt natural, as though they had traveled together for years rather than days. "Tell me about your father," Preston said as they ate, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "What kind of man leaves his daughter a building in a mining town?" Delilah smiled despite herself. "A complicated man. He was brilliant with business, could see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. But he was restless too, always chasing the next venture. I think he hoped one of his investments would finally be the one that let him rest, but he never found it. And you, are you restless too?" "I thought I was content," Delilah said slowly. "I had a comfortable life in Missouri, friends, social standing. But after my father died, I realized I had been living the life people expected of me, not the life I wanted. Coming here, claiming this inheritance, it feels like the first true choice I have made in years." "That takes courage, or desperation," she countered. "I am not sure which." Preston shook his head. "Desperate people do not study maps and ask intelligent questions. Desperate people panic and make foolish choices. You are deliberate in everything you do. That is strength, not desperation." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. They talked late into the night, conversation flowing easily now that they had broken through the initial awkwardness of strangers. Preston told her about his brothers, about the ranch where he learned to read the land, about a childhood that had been hard but filled with love. Delilah shared memories of her father, the rare moments when his attention had been fully hers, the books they had read together, the way he had taught her to think critically about the world. When they finally settled down to sleep, with Preston placing his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire to preserve propriety, Delilah lay awake staring at the stars. They were brighter here than she had ever seen, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She thought about Martha's words, about the way Preston had looked at her, and wondered if she had imagined the connection growing between them. It seemed impossible that something real could develop so quickly, yet she could not deny that she felt more alive, more herself than she had in years. The third day of their journey brought new challenges. The trail climbed higher into the mountains, switching back and forth across steep slopes where one wrong step could mean disaster. Preston led them carefully, always testing the ground ahead, his attention never wavering. Around midday, they encountered another traveler, an old prospector leading a mule loaded with supplies. He greeted them cheerfully and warned them about a recent bandit sighting near Skull Valley. 3 men, armed and looking for easy targets, the prospector said, his weathered face creased with concern. They have been working the road between here and Jerome for the past week, already robbed 2 freight wagons and a family heading to Prescott. Preston's expression darkened. Did the family make it through, shaken but alive? Thank the Lord. The bandits took their money and supplies but left them their wagon and horses. They are not killers from what I heard, but desperate men are unpredictable. The prospector looked at Delilah with open worry. You two should consider holing up somewhere safe until the law runs them down. We will be careful, Preston assured him. Thank you for the warning. After the prospector continued on his way, Preston pulled out his map again. We can still turn back, take the southern route. It would only add a day at this point. But Delilah could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was already planning alternatives. You have an idea, she stated. There is another trail not marked on any map because it is barely wide enough for horses. It runs higher up the mountain, through country too rough for most travelers. I have used it before when I wanted to avoid company. He looked at her seriously. But it is dangerous for other reasons. The path is narrow, and if the weather turns, it could become impassable. Delilah looked up at the sky, clear and blue as a robin's egg. The weather looks fine. Weather in the mountains can change in minutes. But you trust yourself to get us through, Preston held her gaze. I trust myself to try, but I will not risk you unnecessarily, Delilah. You have already survived one near disaster on this journey. It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Thorne, and the intimacy of it sent a flutter through her chest. I trust you, she said simply. Show me this secret trail. The path Preston led them to was indeed barely worthy of the name. It clung to the mountainside like a scar, sometimes widening enough for the horses to walk comfortably, other times narrowing to the point where Delilah had to fight the urge to close her eyes against the sheer drop to their right. Preston rode ahead, constantly checking the trail, occasionally dismounting to test sections that looked unstable. His caution was the only thing that kept Delilah's fear at bay. They were high enough now that the air tasted thin and cold, despite the October sun. To their left, the mountain rose in a series of rocky outcroppings and stunted pines. To their right, the world fell away into a canyon so deep its bottom was lost in shadow. The view was spectacular, all the wild beauty of Arizona spread out below them, but Delilah barely dared look at it for fear of losing her balance. "We are through the worst of it," Preston called back to her as the trail finally widened onto a more stable section. "Another hour and we will be on the far side of the pass." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sound reached them first, a low rumble that Delilah felt in her bones more than heard. Preston went rigid in his saddle, his hand shooting up in a signal to stop. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the world exploded into motion as a section of the trail ahead began to collapse, rocks and dirt sliding down the mountainside in a growing avalanche. "Back!" Preston shouted, wheeling his horse around with remarkable speed. "Go back now." Delilah did not need to be told twice. She turned her horse and urged it back the way they had come, feeling the animal's fear matching her own. Behind her, she heard Preston following, heard the rumble growing louder as more of the mounting gave way. Her horse stumbled on the narrow path, and she cried out, certain they would fall, but the animal recovered and kept moving. Then they were around a bend and the path widened and Preston was beside her, grabbing her reins and pulling both horses to a shuddering stop. The rumbling faded, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by their harsh breathing and the horses' nervous shifting. Preston dismounted and immediately came to her side, his hands reaching up to help her down. The moment her feet touched solid ground, her legs buckled, and she would have fallen if he had not caught her. "I have got you," he said, his arms tight around her, and Delilah realized she was shaking. "You are safe. We are both safe." "This is becoming a pattern," she managed, aiming for humor but hearing the tremor in her voice. "You rescuing me from Rockslides." "A pattern I would happily break," Preston replied, but there was something raw in his voice, something that made her look up at him. His face was pale beneath its tan, his blue eyes dark with an emotion she could not quite name. "When I heard you cry out when I thought you might fall, I felt something I have not felt in years. I felt terror, Delilah, real, bone-deep terror at the thought of losing you." "But you did not lose me," she said softly, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palms as fast as her own. "I am right here." "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "You are." Later, Delilah would not be sure who moved first. Perhaps they both did, drawn together by forces neither could name or resist. His lips met hers in a kiss that tasted of dust and fear and something sweeter, something that felt like coming home after a long journey. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers curling into his shirt, all thoughts of propriety scattered like leaves in a storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. "That was probably not appropriate," Preston said, though he made no move to release her. "Probably not," Delilah agreed, but she was smiling, feeling wild and free and more alive than she had ever been. "Are you going to apologize?" "No," he said firmly. "I am not." "Good." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other as the mountains loomed around them and the sky began to shade toward evening. Finally, Preston sighed and reluctantly stepped back. "We cannot go forward on this trail, not with that collapse. We will have to backtrack and take the long way around after all. Will we make it before dark?" He looked at the sun, gauging the time with practiced ease. "No, we will need to camp somewhere on the mountain tonight. There is a spot about an hour back, a small plateau with good shelter. We will be safe there." The plateau proved to be everything Preston promised, a flat space protected on three sides by rock walls, with a clear view of the trail they had traveled. They made camp quickly, working together with the easy coordination they had developed over the past days. As Preston built the fire and Delilah unpacked their supplies, she felt the weight of what had happened between them, the kiss that had changed everything and nothing all at once. "We should talk about it," Preston said abruptly as they ate their supper of jerky and hardtack. "About what happened earlier." Delilah met his gaze steadily. "What is there to talk about? You kissed me, I kissed you back, and neither of us regrets it. That seems fairly straightforward." "Straightforward," he repeated, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Is that what you call it?" "What would you call it?" Preston set down his food and looked at her with such intensity that she felt pinned in place. "I would call it the most significant moment of my life," he said quietly. "I would call it the point where everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be wrong. I thought I was content being alone, moving from place to place without ties or commitments. But then I pulled you from that rockslide, and you looked at me with those eyes full of trust and courage, and something in me recognized something in you. Like meeting someone I have known all my life but only just encountered." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unbidden. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us, impossible and undeniable all at once. I came west looking for my father's legacy, but I think I found something else entirely." "What is that?" "A future that might actually be mine." Preston crossed the space between them and took her hands in his. "I need you to understand something, Delilah. I am not a wealthy man. I have my horse, my skills, and whatever savings I have managed to put aside. I cannot offer you the life you left behind in Missouri, the comfort and social standing." "I do not want that life," she interrupted. "If I did, I would have stayed there. What I want is a life of my own choosing, with people who value me for who I am rather than what I represent." "And what do you choose?" "You," she said without hesitation, "if you will have me." The kiss that followed was different from the first, slower and deeper, filled with promise rather than desperation. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers and said, "I have nothing prepared, no pretty speeches or romantic gestures. But I swear to you, Delilah Thorne, I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you have placed in me." "You already are," she told him. "You saved my life and asked nothing in return. You have treated me with respect and honesty. You have shown me who you are through your actions, and that is worth more than any prepared speech." They sat together by the fire, Delilah leaning against Preston's shoulder while he kept watch over the darkening landscape. They talked about everything and nothing, making plans and dreaming dreams. Preston told her about his hope to one day own land of his own, a place where he could put down roots. Delilah shared her ideas about her inherited property in Jerome, how she might turn it into something useful for the community rather than simply selling it off. "We could do it together," Preston suggested tentatively. "Whatever your building is suitable for, we could develop it as a partnership. Your business sense and my knowledge of the territory could complement each other." "A partnership," Delilah mused. "I like the sound of that." "I was thinking more than just a business partnership," Preston said, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I know it is too soon. We have barely known each other a week, but I also know my own heart. I have never been one to make rash decisions, but when something is right, it is right. And you, Delilah, you are right in every way that matters." Delilah turned to look at him properly, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the hope mixed with fear. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Irons?" "Yes," he said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When we reach Jerome and you have seen your inheritance, when you have had time to be certain of your feelings. I am asking if you would consider spending your life with me, building something together that is ours alone." "I will not need time to be certain," Delilah said, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "But I appreciate your patience nonetheless. Yes, Preston, when the time comes, my answer will be yes." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and then another, until the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Eventually, they settled down to sleep, closer than propriety allowed but not caring, both of them understanding that they had already crossed lines that could not be uncrossed. Delilah felt safe in a way she never had before, protected not just by Preston's physical presence, but by the certainty of his regard for her. The next day they backtracked to a safer route, adding hours to their journey but moving with lighter hearts. They talked constantly now, sharing histories and opinions, discovering compatibilities and differences with equal delight. Preston taught her to read the land the way he did, pointing out signs of water and weather, tracks of animals and hints of human passage. Delilah shared her knowledge of accounting and business management, explaining how her father had taught her to see patterns in numbers the way Preston saw patterns in nature. By the time Jerome came into view, perched on its mountainside like a collection of matchboxes someone had carelessly scattered, Delilah felt she knew Preston as well as she had ever known anyone. More importantly, she trusted him completely, not just with her safety but with her hopes and dreams and fears. When he reached over and took her hand as they looked down at the town, she squeezed his fingers and smiled. "Ready?" he asked. "With you? Always." Jerome proved to be exactly as rough as Preston had warned, a town built on steep slopes around the copper mines that gave it purpose. The main street was more of a stairway in places, with buildings clinging to the hillside at precarious angles. The population was diverse and rowdy, miners and merchants, and all manner of people drawn by the promise of wealth from the red rocks. Preston led them to a respectable boarding house run by a formidable woman named Agnes Parker, who took one look at the two of them and seemed to understand everything. "You will want 2 rooms," Agnes stated rather than asked, though her eyes sparkled with knowing humor. "For now, at least." "For now," Preston agreed easily, making Delilah blush. After settling their belongings and cleaning up from the journey, Preston accompanied Delilah to the land office to sort out her inheritance. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, pulled out the relevant documents and spread them across his desk. "The Thorne property," he said, adjusting his spectacles. Yes, a substantial building right on Main Street. 3 stories, good construction, currently vacant. Your father purchased it from the original owner just before he passed. I believe he had plans to convert it into a hotel." "A hotel," Delilah repeated, glancing at Preston. "That would make sense. The town is clearly growing." "Growing indeed," the clerk agreed. "We get more people every month, and lodging is in short supply. The boarding houses are full, and the existing hotel is barely maintaining standards. A well-run establishment could do very well here." After signing the necessary papers and obtaining the keys, Preston and Delilah walked to the property in question. It stood at a prime location where the main road widened slightly, a solid brick structure that had weathered better than many of its neighbors. The ground floor had been a mercantile, the clerk had explained, but the owner had died and his family had returned east, leaving the building empty for nearly a year. Delilah unlocked the door with hands that shook slightly, aware that she was stepping into her future. The interior was dusty and dim, with sheets covering what furniture remained, but the bones of the building were sound. The ground floor was a large open space perfect for a hotel lobby and dining room. The upper floors, which they explored by lamplight, contained a dozen rooms of various sizes, all in need of cleaning and furnishing but structurally intact. "This could really be something," Preston said as they stood in what might become the best suite on the top floor, looking out at the view of the valley below. "With the right management and investment, this could be one of the finest hotels in the territory." Would you help me?" Delilah asked, turning to face him. "Not just as my husband when that time comes, but as my true partner in this venture. I have business sense, but I do not know this town or these people. I need someone who understands the territory, who can help me navigate the challenges I cannot even anticipate yet." Preston pulled her into his arms, unconcerned about the dust they were stirring up. "I would be honored. We will build this together, Delilah. Your vision and my knowledge combined. It will be our foundation, the place where we start our life together." They spent the next several days assessing the property and planning their next steps. Preston took her to meet the key people in Jerome, using his connections through the mining company to establish her credibility. He introduced her to suppliers and contractors, to the banker and the mayor, always presenting her as a serious businesswoman rather than a naive outsider. Delilah appreciated his support while also making sure people understood she was the owner and primary decision-maker. Preston never overshadowed her, instead using his influence to amplify her voice. They hired a local crew to clean and renovate the building, and Delilah threw herself into the project with fierce dedication. She spent hours poring over account books and supplier catalogs, planning every detail of what she was already calling the Thorne Hotel. Preston worked alongside the renovation crew during the day, his experience with construction proving invaluable, and spent his evenings with Delilah, discussing plans and reviewing progress. It was during one of these evening planning sessions, about 3 weeks after their arrival in Jerome, that Preston set down the papers he had been reviewing and said, "Marry me." Delilah looked up from her ledger. "I thought we had already settled that question." "We settled it in theory," Preston replied. "I am asking in practice. Marry me, Delilah, not someday in the vague future, but soon, this week if possible." "This week," she repeated, caught off guard. "Why the urgency?" Preston came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Because every day I spend with you, I am more certain that waiting is pointless. Because we are already building our life together, already partners in every way that matters. Because people in this town are starting to talk, noticing that we spend all our time together, and I want to protect your reputation. But mostly because I love you, Delilah Thorne, and I see no reason to delay making that official in the eyes of God and the law." Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes, the good kind that came from joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she said, the first time either of them had spoken the words so plainly. "And you are right. There is no reason to wait. Yes, Preston, let us marry this week." They were wed 4 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church that served Jerome's more respectable citizens. Agnes Parker stood up as Delilah's witness, having taken the young woman under her protective wing. Preston's witness was a fellow surveyor named Thomas Grant, a gruff man who nonetheless pumped Preston's hand with genuine warmth and told him he was getting a fine woman. The ceremony itself was brief, the words familiar and profound, binding them together in the eyes of the law and the community. What surprised Delilah most was how many people attended. Despite being relative newcomers to Jerome, they had apparently made an impression. The church was full of miners and merchants, of people Preston had worked with, and people Delilah had hired for the hotel renovation. It was a community welcoming them, accepting them as permanent residents rather than transient visitors. The celebration afterward at Agnes's boarding house was loud and cheerful, with food and drink flowing freely. People toasted the newlyweds and shared advice, both practical and comically impractical. When Preston swept Delilah into a dance despite the cramped space, spinning her around the parlor while someone played a fiddle, she laughed with pure delight. "This is perfect," she told him. slightly dizzy from the spinning and the champagne and the sheer happiness of the moment. "Utterly perfect." "You are perfect," Preston corrected, pulling her close. "I am just the fortunate man who gets to spend his life with you." That night, in the room that had been Preston's but was now officially theirs, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Delilah had been nervous, having only the vaguest understanding of what to expect, but Preston was patient and gentle, guiding her with care and consideration. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, she felt fundamentally changed, not just physically but emotionally. She was someone's wife now, Preston's wife, and the reality of it filled her with contentment. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "That my father would have liked you," Delilah said. "He valued competence and integrity, and you have both in abundance. I wish I could have met him, could have asked his blessing properly. He would have given it. He might have questioned your finances," she added with a small laugh, "but he would have recognized your quality." Preston was quiet for a moment, then said, "I promise you, Delilah, I will work every day to build a life worthy of you. The hotel is just the beginning. We will make something lasting here, something that matters." "We already have," she told him, tilting her head up to kiss him. "We have each other." The Thorne Hotel opened its doors 6 months after Delilah and Preston's wedding, in the spring of 1883. The renovation had been extensive, transforming the dusty, empty building into an establishment that would have looked at home in San Francisco or Denver. The ground floor featured a spacious lobby with comfortable furniture, and a large dining room that served meals to hotel guests and the public. The upper floors contained 20 well-appointed guest rooms, each with fresh linens and sturdy furniture built by local craftsmen. Delilah managed the day-to-day operations with skill and grace, her business acumen proving exactly as sharp as Preston had suspected. She hired staff carefully, valuing reliability and courtesy over experience, and trained them to her exacting standards. The hotel quickly gained a reputation for cleanliness, good food, and fair prices, becoming the preferred lodging for anyone with business in Jerome. Preston continued his work with the mining company, but increasingly focused his attention on the hotel and other business ventures. He and Delilah had become known as the couple to see if you needed something done in Jerome, whether that was arranging financing for a new business, settling a dispute between neighbors, or simply getting reliable information about the territory. They were building something together, exactly as Preston had promised, creating a foundation that went far beyond the physical structure of the hotel. It was during the hotel's first summer of operation that Delilah realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice and been feeling queasy in the mornings, but had attributed it to stress and the sometimes questionable water supply. Agnes Parker, with the wisdom of a woman who had raised 5 children of her own, took one look at Delilah's face over breakfast one morning and stated flatly, "You are carrying." "I think I might be," Delilah admitted, the words making it suddenly real. "I have not told Preston yet." "I wanted to be certain. You are certain enough. That green tinge is not from bad eggs." Agnes reached over and patted her hand. "Congratulations, dear. Preston will be over the moon." Agnes was right. When Delilah told Preston that evening in the privacy of the suite they had claimed on the hotel's top floor, he literally lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with joy. "Careful," she protested, though she was laughing too. "I am carrying precious cargo." "The most precious," he agreed, setting her down gently and then kneeling to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there. This is your father speaking. I am very pleased to make your acquaintance, even if you are not much to look at yet." Delilah ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle. "You will be a wonderful father." "I will certainly try," he said, looking up at her with such tenderness it made her throat tight. "This child will know it is loved and wanted every single day of its life." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Delilah continued working throughout, much to Agnes's vocal disapproval. But Delilah was not one to sit idle, and the hotel needed her attention. She modified her duties as her body changed, spending more time on accounts and management and less time on her feet dealing with guests. Preston became comically overprotective, hovering around her and trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Delilah told him after he literally took a ledger from her hands because he thought it was too heavy. "You are carrying our child," he countered. "That makes you infinitely precious and in need of careful handling." Despite her exasperation, Delilah could not help but be touched by his concern. She had heard stories of men who showed no interest in their wives during pregnancy, who viewed it as women's business and kept their distance. Preston was the opposite, constantly involved and excited, already making plans for their child's future. Their son was born in February of 1884, during a cold snap that left Jerome dusted with snow. The labor was long and difficult, testing Delilah's strength to its limits, but she held Preston's hand through all of it and drew courage from his steady presence. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Delilah understood for the first time what it meant to have your heart exist outside your body. "He is perfect," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion as he stroked the baby's dark hair. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy, but suddenly all those conversations seemed irrelevant. Delilah looked at her son, at the scrunched-up face and tiny fists, and said, "Daniel, Daniel Thomas Irons, after my father and your witness at our wedding." "Daniel Thomas Irons," Preston repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Daniel. You have a lot to live up to, being the son of such a remarkable woman." "And such a devoted father," Delilah added, watching as Preston carefully took the baby and cradled him with surprising confidence. For a man who claimed to know nothing about infants, he certainly seemed natural with his son. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Daniel proved to be a healthy, loud child with strong lungs and definite opinions. Delilah had hired a capable assistant manager for the hotel, a widow named Caroline Myers who had excellent organizational skills, which allowed her to focus on her son while still maintaining oversight of the business. Preston cut back on his travel for the mining company, taking only local assignments that allowed him to return home each night. They were happy in a way that felt almost dangerous, as though the universe might notice and decide to balance the scales. But the months rolled on, and their happiness remained intact, growing deeper as they settled into the rhythms of marriage and parenthood. Daniel thrived, growing into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When Daniel was 18 months old, Preston came home one evening with an unusual expression on his face, halfway between excitement and uncertainty. Delilah, who was teaching Daniel to stack blocks in their suite, looked up at her husband with immediate interest. "What has happened?" "The mining company is offering me a new position," Preston said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Manager of operations for the entire Jerome area. It would mean better pay, more stability, and no more travel, but it would also mean long hours and significant responsibility." "That sounds like a promotion. Why do you look so conflicted?" Preston sat down on the floor beside her, reaching out to steady the tower of blocks Daniel was enthusiastically destroying, because it would change things. Right now, I have the flexibility to help you with the hotel, to be present for Daniel, to have some semblance of balance. This new position would consume more of my time, at least initially. Delilah considered the situation carefully, but it would provide better security for our family. And the hotel is running smoothly now with Caroline's help. I think we could manage the adjustment. You are sure? I will not take it if you have doubts. I am sure, Delilah said firmly. We adapt, Preston. That is what we have always done. Take the position. Build your career the same way we built the hotel, together, even when we are working on different pieces. Preston leaned over and kissed her, careful not to disturb Daniel's renewed block-stacking efforts. Have I mentioned recently that marrying you was the best decision I ever made? Not since this morning, she teased. You are getting lax. He did take the position, and the next year brought changes to their routine but not to their fundamental partnership. Preston threw himself into his new role with characteristic dedication, working to improve safety conditions in the mines and negotiating with the mine owners about fair wages. He became a respected voice in Jerome's business community, known for his integrity and his willingness to listen to all sides of a dispute. Delilah expanded the hotel's operations, adding a second dining room and improving the kitchen facilities. The Thorne Hotel had become an institution in Jerome, the place where deals were made and celebrations held. She hired more staff and trained them well, creating a culture of excellence that permeated every aspect of the business. People came from across the territory specifically to stay at the Thorne Hotel, drawn by its reputation for quality and service. In the autumn of 1886, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement, but also a measure of calm confidence they had lacked with Daniel. They knew what to expect now, understood the demands and rewards of parenthood. Preston was just as attentive as he had been during the first pregnancy, but less frantically worried, trusting in Delilah's strength and capability. Their daughter was born in May of 1887, arriving with considerably less drama than her brother. The labor was shorter, the delivery easier, and when the midwife placed the infant in Delilah's arms, she felt that same overwhelming rush of love she had experienced with Daniel, but mixed now with gratitude for how much easier this had been. A girl, Preston said wonderingly, touching the baby's tiny hand and watching in amazement as her fingers wrapped around his thumb. We have a daughter. We do, Delilah agreed, already seeing traces of Preston's features in the baby's face. Should we name her Patricia after your mother? Preston's eyes went bright with unshed tears. She would have been so honored. Patricia Ann Irons after both our mothers. Watching Preston with their daughter, seeing the gentleness with which he held her and the soft way he spoke to her, Delilah felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it all. They had built something extraordinary together, not just the hotel or their businesses, but this family, this life rooted in trust and love and partnership. Daniel, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to help and touch and see. Preston spent patient hours teaching him how to be gentle, how to understand that babies needed careful handling. The sight of her husband sitting with both children, Daniel chattering away while Patricia slept against Preston's chest, became Delilah's favorite tableau. The years flowed on, marked by the steady growth of their children and their businesses. The Thorne Hotel remained Jerome's premier lodging, adapting to the town's changes while maintaining its high standards. Preston rose further in the mining company, becoming one of the most influential men in the territory's copper industry. But despite their success and increasing prominence, They never forgot where they had started, that moment when a rockslide brought them together and changed everything. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893 with a party at the hotel that seemed to include half of Jerome. Their children, now 9 and 6, helped serve cake to guests with varying degrees of competence and enthusiasm. Agnes Parker, still running her boarding house despite being well into her 70s, gave a speech about the day Preston had brought Delilah to her door, dusty and exhausted but with eyes only for each other. "I knew then," Agnes declared, "that those two would make something special of themselves. And I was right, as I usually am about these things." That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Preston and Delilah sat on the balcony of their suite, looking out at the town they had made their home. The lights of Jerome twinkled across the mountainside, each one representing a family, a story, a dream being pursued in this rough but vital place. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Leaving your comfortable life in Missouri, coming to this wild territory?" Delilah leaned into his warmth, thinking about the question seriously. "Never," she said finally. "Not for a single moment. That life was not mine, not really. I was playing a role people expected of me. This life, everything we have built here, this is authentically mine. Ours." "Even the rockslides," Preston teased. "Especially the rockslides," she replied, smiling at the memory. "After all, without that first one, we never would have met. I would have ridden right past you and continued on to Jerome alone, and my life would have been so much smaller." Preston pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I think about that sometimes, about all the small chances that had to align perfectly for us to find each other. If I had been a mile further down the trail, if you had taken a different route, if the mountain had not chosen that exact moment to come loose. I prefer to think we were meant to find each other," Delilah said. "That fate or providence or whatever you want to call it saw two people who needed each other and arranged the circumstances. You saved my life that day, Preston, but you also gave me a life worth saving." "You did the same for me," he replied seriously. "I was drifting before I met you, moving through the world without real purpose or connection. You gave me roots, a reason to build something lasting. You became my foundation in every sense that matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night and feeling the contentment that comes from a life well lived. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Below, the hotel that bore Delilah's name stood solid and prosperous, testament to their vision and hard work. And between them, this connection that had begun with a desperate rescue and grown into something unshakable, something that defined who they were as individuals and as a couple. As the years continued to pass, Preston and Delilah became elder statesmen of sorts in Jerome, the couple people looked to for wisdom and guidance. They never lorded their success over anyone, instead using their influence to improve the community. Delilah established a lending library at the hotel, making books available to anyone who wanted them regardless of their ability to stay at the establishment. Preston worked tirelessly to improve mining safety, saving countless lives through his advocacy for better equipment and practices. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's integrity and his mother's business sense. He attended university in California, studying engineering with an eye toward improving mining technology. Patricia inherited her parents' stubborn independence, announcing at age 15 that she intended to become a doctor, despite the numerous obstacles facing women in medicine. Both Preston and Delilah supported their children's ambitions without reservation, determined that their offspring would have every opportunity to pursue their dreams. On a warm evening in October of 1898, 15 years after that first rockslide, Preston and Delilah took a ride out to the canyon where they had met. The trail had long since been cleared and regularized, turned into a proper road that posed no danger to travelers. But they still remembered it as it had been, wild and treacherous, the place where their lives intersected. They stood at the spot where the ledge had collapsed beneath Delilah's feet all those years ago, where Preston had appeared through the dust like an answer to a prayer. The canyon was peaceful now, showing no signs of the violence that had occurred. But the memory remained vivid for both of them, as fresh as though it had happened yesterday rather than a decade and a half ago. "I still dream about it sometimes," Delilah admitted, her hand in Preston's as they looked out over the landscape. "About the sound of the rocks falling, the feeling of the ground disappearing beneath me. But in my dreams you are always there. You always catch me." "I always will," Preston promised. "For as long as I draw breath, I will catch you when you fall." "I know," she said simply, because she did. In all their years together, through challenges and triumphs, setbacks and victories, Preston had never wavered in his devotion to her and their family. He was exactly the man he had appeared to be that first day, honest and capable and fundamentally good. She had built her life on him as surely as he had built his on her, each of them providing the stability and support the other needed. They rode back to Jerome as the sun set, painting the sky in those shades of orange and gold that Delilah always associated with Arizona. The town had changed so much since they had first arrived, growing and evolving, but its essential character remained. It was still a place where people came to make their fortunes, to reinvent themselves, to find something they could not find anywhere else. For Delilah, that something had been Preston. For Preston, it had been Delilah. And together, they had found a purpose larger than themselves, a legacy that would extend far beyond their individual lives. When Daniel graduated from university and returned to Jerome with innovative ideas about mining safety, Preston welcomed him into the company with pride. When Patricia left for medical school back east, Delilah helped her pack and reminded her that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. They watched their children become adults, make their own choices, begin to build their own lives, and felt the satisfaction of knowing they had done their job well. The new century arrived, bringing with it changes they could never have imagined when they first met in 1882. But through it all, Preston and Delilah remained constant, their partnership as strong as ever. The hotel continued to thrive under Delilah's management, even after she began training younger staff to eventually take over. Preston retired from the mining company to spend more time with his grandchildren, 3 boisterous youngsters Daniel and his wife brought to visit regularly. On their 30th anniversary, Preston surprised Delilah with a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist in San Francisco, depicting that first moment when he had ridden through the dust to rescue her from the rockslide. The artist had captured everything perfectly: the chaos of the falling rocks, the desperation on Delilah's face, the fierce determination on Preston's as he reached for her. "So we never forget," Preston said as Delilah stared at the painting with tears streaming down her face. "So we always remember where we came from and what brought us together." "As if I could ever forget," Delilah replied, but she was deeply moved by the gesture. They hung the painting in their private sitting room where they could see it every day, a reminder of the moment that changed everything. Patricia completed her medical training and opened a practice in Phoenix, becoming one of the few female doctors in the territory. She married a fellow physician, and together they worked to improve healthcare access for the poor. Daniel continued his father's work in mine safety, eventually becoming manager of operations himself, carrying on the Irons family legacy of integrity and innovation. As Preston and Delilah entered their 60s, they began to slow down, as everyone must eventually. But their minds remained sharp, and their partnership as vital as ever. They spent their days managing the hotel from their suite, meeting with old friends, playing with grandchildren, and enjoying the life they had built together. The Thorne Hotel had become an institution in Jerome, as much a part of the town's identity as the mines themselves. On a spring morning in 1910, when they had been married for 27 years and known each other for nearly 30, Preston woke early and simply watched Delilah sleep. Her hair was gray now, streaked with white, and lines marked her face where smooth skin had once been. But to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had pulled her from that rockslide, as vital and essential to his existence as breath itself. She stirred and opened her eyes, catching him staring. "What are you looking at?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "My whole world," he replied simply. "The foundation I built my life on." Delilah reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking with the ease of long practice. "And you were mine," she said. "Our mine will always be mine." They lay there together as the sun rose over Jerome, over the hotel they had built, over the life they had created from dust and determination, and a rockslide that might have ended everything but instead began everything. Neither of them knew how much time they had left, whether it would be years or decades, but both understood that it did not really matter. What mattered was that they had found each other, had chosen each other, and had built something lasting together. The Thorne Hotel stood solid on its hillside, full of guests and activity, a living testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together. Inside the best suite on the top floor, Preston and Delilah Irons held hands and watched the morning light paint their world gold, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved better. Their children were grown and thriving, their grandchildren healthy and happy, their business prosperous and respected. But more than any of that, they had each other, the partnership forged in dust and danger, tempered by time and strengthened by choice. Preston had rescued Delilah from a rockslide, but she had rescued him from a life without meaning or connection. Together, they had become the foundation each other needed, and on that foundation, they had built something truly remarkable. The years continued to roll forward, as years always do, bringing the changes and chances that define human existence. Preston and Delilah faced them together, as they had faced everything since that October day in 1882, when fate and a collapsing mountain brought them together. They grew old together, celebrated milestones together, faced losses together, and through it all their love remained the constant that defined them. When Preston passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Delilah held his hand and told him everything she had told him 1,000 times before. That he was loved, that he was valued, that he had made her life infinitely better by being in it. And when Delilah followed him 2 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the hotel, she had made her life's work. Her last words were of Preston and that first ride through the canyon, when a stranger became her savior, and then so much more. The Thorne Hotel continued to operate for many more years, eventually becoming a historic landmark in Jerome, a reminder of the town's glory days and the people who built it. The story of its founders became local legend, the tale of how a cowboy rescued a woman from a rockslide, and how that woman became the foundation he built his life on. It was a story of courage and choice, of love that grew from crisis into something unshakable, of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.